Well, good morning. My name is Jim Arch. I am the land conservationist here in Clark County, Wisconsin. I've been the conservationist now in Clark County for about 5.5 years. Before that, I was doing independent crop consulting work with farmers. My presentation today is going to be on working with Amish and Mennonite communities. I'd like to just give you a quick cultural review of the Amish and Mennonites. The first question, I guess, would be, is who are these people? So you have to go back to the early 1500s when what happened was this cultural movement called the Protestant Reformation. And the Mennonite community spun off of that event that happened. And then about 150 years later, there was a group within the Mennonite community in Europe that thought the beliefs of the Mennonites were not conservative enough. And that's when the Amish group was formed. The Amish and the Mennonites share one principal belief, is that baptism is done at adulthood, when a person is able to make a conscious decision if they want to be part of their church or not. Sometimes this is called Anabaptism, or they call Mennonites or Amish Anabaptists. Tradition is used to put practices into principle. Basically, a lot of the practices that these cultures or communities practice has been passed on from generation to generation. They practice basically what they preach. I just want to touch on this practice of Rumspringa. Some of you may have seen some of these cable shows like Amish Gone Wild and are curious, what is it really about? Because what they show on TV sometimes isn't accurate. So Rumspringa is basically a practice where when teenagers reach the age of 14 to 16, and it's generally more practiced by the males, they're given the opportunity to go out into, if you want to call it the real world or the English world, and practice some of the things that the English do. And when I say English, I'm talking about the non-Mennonites or non-Amish. So to them, we're all English. And then the survival of these communities depends on large families, because mostly, for the most part, Mennonites and Amish, they don't have insurance. They're self-insured. They don't pay any Social Security tax or Medicare tax. So when people get older, they have to rely on a working generation to support them. So in order to do that, you need to have young people coming up that eventually will grow up and start working. Typically a family will have 6 to 12 children, 6 to 7 children. One of my Mennonite neighbors has actually 13 children. Amish practice more subsistence farming. Basically, they only try to make enough money to survive. They're not like trying to get ahead of their neighbors. And it's actually frowned upon if they are getting further ahead of their Amish neighbors. So I'll show some pictures later about what Amish and Mennonite um, farms or homesteads look like. That gives you a little better idea of what I'm talking about. The Mennonites are more capitalist. Generally, they're more about money, and you could say they're kind of more materialistic. They have nice places, um, and they will have some will have very nice equipment. Um, and if they don't have steel wheels on their equipment, you could say that they're probably English. You won't know the difference just looking at their equipment. Um, Interactions with other communities. Interactions with other communities, the English, such as the English, the really don't interact a whole lot with the English, other than when maybe they used to use their phone, need to use their phone, or maybe need to hire them to drive them someplace. Um, of course, they do interact more with English when they're trying to sell something, maybe bakery or sometimes we have some Amish in Clark County that make um, sheds for like lawns and stuff. So um, there is some interaction there. Um, the Mennonites, I would say, do interact a little more with the English. Um, but it's definitely geared more towards commerce. I mean, you don't see the English going to their churches, and you sure don't see them coming to the churches where the English go either. And and certainly you'll never see a Mennonite or an Amish for that matter in a tavern, um, unless they have broken away from the community. Okay, so where did these Mennonites and Amish come from? The ones in Wisconsin, for the most part, have migrated from the Pennsylvania Lancaster area. Um, and they migrated from Europe to the Pennsylvania Lancaster area, probably back in the mid 1700s, I would say. So, um, the Amish do have a tendency to move more often. And this can be for a number of reasons. They might like to move more because obviously for inbreeding reasons, you need to mix up the gene pool a little bit. Um, or they might move because they have issues with the bishop. And this is more probably with the Amish because they're more conservative than the Mennonites. And sometimes some of the Amish members of the church maybe want to get a little more progressive, and the bishop might say, no, you can't. And so they'll just leave, and the members will leave that want to get more progressive and go to another Amish community, sometimes in another state. So the Mennonites, they have a tendency to be more competitive when moving into an area, um, especially when it comes to farms. If you are surrounded maybe by a couple of Mennonite farms, I can almost guarantee you that they will knock on your door before you even are thinking about selling, just to let you know that we're interested in your farm. So, yeah, like I said, Mennonites don't move often. I like to say once a Mennonite farm, always a Mennonite farm. Um, the leading states with Amish or Mennonites, Ohio is number one, Pennsylvania number two, Indiana is 3, Wisconsin is number 4, and New York is number 5. In general, populations double about every 20 years. I believe I seen a estimate that there are around 300,000 Amish and Mennonites living in the United States and Canada combined. Here in Clark County, and I got this number from the health department because they have a little more, I would say a little more statistics on the Amish and Mennonites in the county. And the estimate is there's probably around 11,500 Amish and Mennonites in Clark County out of around 34,500 total population. So why are they here? There's less development in Clark County than there is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And so there's more opportunity to grow a family. And also to protect the children from outside influences from, say, an urban area. It's more advantageous for them to move to an area that's not as developed. Cheaper land, they can sell their land probably 4 or 5 times more than what they pay for land here in Clark County. So, there's, especially when you're looking at a big family and have boys that probably want to farm at some time. If you sell your land for 4 or 5 times what you pay for land in Clark County, it gives you more money to buy more land with, so you can set up a son or 2 on a farm of their own. Like I said before, they're here probably to mix up the gene pool some, to reduce inbreeding. Bishop issues, like I mentioned previously, some of the bishops can be more strict and control what members of the church can basically have for conveniences. More business opportunities is also another reason to move. Here in Clark County, it's nothing to see a sawmill every 1 or 2 miles. So how many sawmills can one area support? So, and also, there may be more opportunities to buy cheaper farmland if they want to get more land to support a family. That's another reason why they move. Education, Amish and Mennonites only attend school generally from the 6th or up to the 8th grade. Interestingly, I've seen studies in other states that have been done on aptitudes of the Mennonites or Amish compared to their English counterparts, and they generally score pretty high on math and English. Where they're really weak, though, is on the sciences, and that is because the children are taught the testaments, Bible teachings, and they don't get into the sciences at all, which can make it difficult for us sometimes, because a lot of what we're taught is based on science. So I can get into a little more depth on that later in the presentation. Children, especially boys, learn hands-on at very young age, sometimes too young. And what I mean by that is it is nothing to see, especially a Mennonite child driving a tractor that's way bigger than my dad would have ever let me step on to drive. Um, and we've had some very sad accidents over the last several years of this young children on equipment they should never be driving by themselves. Uh, like I said, they aren't taught the sciences. Um, Girls are taught to work in the household, um, in the garden. Boys are taught to learn a trade or to farm. Um, Many of these males, when they graduate or finish their education at 8th grade, go into construction, welding, um, house building, pole shed building, and they are very good at it too. Um, some more of the Amish and Mennonite differences are Amish use horse and buggy only, no tractors. Um, you know, they will use maybe a baler to bale hay, but they cannot pull the bale or pull the baler in the field. What they do is they'll have the baler set up stationary, and they'll have a gas powered engine on it. And so they'll um, harvest the hay in the field loosely, like my grandpa and dad did before they got modern equipment. And then they'll haul it to where the baler is next to the barn, usually, and unload the loose hay into the baler, and then have an elevator there where it's put into the barn. Um, Amish do not have phones. Now, this maybe isn't 100% true. In general, it is true, though. The Amish rely mostly on the English to use their phone. But I have noticed it seems like more and more, especially if the Amish have maybe like a business, they will have a cell phone. And it does, of course, depend on what the bishop will let them do. Amish are social, but they are a closed society. Um, you know, I've got some friends that are Amish, not too far from where I live, and um, and I used to go over there before they moved away, and we could have a conversation about things and joke about stuff. Um, but um, but they, for the most part, they're a closed society. Mennonites, um, as far as equipment goes, they have tractors and modern machinery, but there are differences within the Mennonite communities. Um, and what I mean by that is, in Clark County, we have basically two types of Mennonites. We have what we call the steel wheel Mennonites, where they have modern equipment, but it has to have steel wheels. Um, and then we have the rubber tired Mennonites, where they have modern equipment and it can have rubber tires on it. On the Mennonites, all the Mennonites will have phones, cell phones and home phones. And I would say more of them have home phones than English do, because as you know, more and more English seem to be dumping their landline phones and just going to cell phones. The Mennonites rely on horse and buggy, but not all. So when you're dealing with the steel wheel Mennonites, like I mentioned before, They have only horse and buggy for modes of transportation. Um, the rubber-tired Mennonites will have cars. Generally, they are always black. Um, and they're generally Chevys, it seems like. Cars or trucks or Chevys. And um, but I have seen some of the younger ones driving around BMWs, Audis, Toyotas, but they always, I have to say, are black. The Mennonites will also use bicycles, um, and the Amish, you'll never see one riding a bicycle. Um, Amish and Mennonite differences, some pictures I took in Clark County. So here's a couple of tractors and a hayfield that are owned by steel-wheeled Mennonite. You can see this, the wheels are steel on the back of the tractors. Otherwise, they're, I'd say fairly modern tractors. They might be 25, 30 years old, um, but they're pretty modern. This next photo here is a picture I snapped of a Amish homestead. Here's another Amish homestead. Actually, this is across the road from where I live. You can see the materials that are used on some of these buildings in the foreground here was actually used tin they took from somewheres and put a building together using it. In the background, that's just a new house they built probably about 12 years ago. Here's an Amish business. This is what we call a bent and dent store run by an Amish. And they sell usually food that's maybe a couple weeks or a month outdated. The cans might be dented a little bit that they can't sell in a store where the English go. And they will bring in meat trucks. So because they don't have refrigeration in the store, so they'll have a truck come in that's a reefer with a cooler on it and sell meat right out of the back of the truck to customers. And they'll do this maybe once every 2 weeks or so. And I guess it's legal. And there actually is a lot of English that go to this store. You can buy stuff pretty reasonable there. So here's a Mennonite farmstead. You can see it's buildings are, I would say, probably nicer looking, newer. And another thing you'll see pretty common in front of Mennonites farmsteads or houses are lots of flowers. They keep their places really neat. In a lot of cases, neater than the English do. That's, and one thing, I'll have to say too, a lot of these farmsteads, at one time they were run by English. And so, the parents got old, maybe died off, and the children of them parents maybe didn't want the farmstead anymore, and they moved to the city, and the buildings are falling down or almost falling down. The Mennonites come in, they fix these places up really nice. And most times they do it without any cost sharing from the government. It's all done with internal funds. Here's another Mennonite building or farmstead. Here's a greenhouse in the lower right here. You'll see a fair amount of Mennonites that have farms and also have a greenhouse on the side, a greenhouse business. This picture here is of a Mennonite farm repair shop. This one is of a Mennonite chicken barn. I believe there's probably around 25,000 chickens in this barn here. This is a Mennonite hardware store. A dental clinic run by the Mennonites. I've never been inside of it, but I believe they actually have a regular English dentist that they hire to do the dental work for them. This is a meat packing plant run by the Mennonites, and there's several of them in Clark County that the Mennonites own. So can these groups be taught conservation? I would say yes, under the right conditions. In meaning, you can't get too heavy in the sciences. Otherwise, you're probably going to end up turning them off if you do. The Mennonites regularly will attend field days. They're very curious about things. So field days are a good mode to use to get your point across. The Amish, generally, you won't see them at field days. Classroom training events is another method to get your point across. In Clark County, because we have so many Mennonites, and the Mennonites generally do not have computers. If they do have computers, they're restricted as far as, internet access, email, etc. So for our nutrient management planning training, we have a separate class that we do just for the Mennonites because they don't use computers. We have to structure the class on using just free form, hard copy training methods versus the tech school training that we do for Snap Plus. They use lakes and rivers too. So, they have a vested interest in conservation if they want to keep those lakes and rivers usable. And so you can use that as a motivation, to get your point across. That, hey, you guys are using these lakes and rivers too. Don't you want them cleaned? The Mennonites seem to be more receptive to local government versus federal. It just seems like, they seem to come to land conservation or DW extension before they'll go to like a federal agency for help or information. The Amish, I would say, are harder to work with. They're just more conservative. If you're trying to get them to maybe try a new practice, it is just harder. And probably a lot of that has to do with the bishop. The members maybe don't want to get the bishop mad or cause an issue there. Here's a corn chopping field day event that was done a couple years ago in Clark County. Here's in the upper right here is a town hall where we regularly do our once a year NMP training for the Mennonites. Making contact, I guess when you're starting out, I would seek out the more progressive members in the group, because you will have, especially in the Mennonite communities, you'll have some that are just more progressive. We've got some that have been doing no-till in the county for 10 years, and there are some that won't even consider no-till. or at least not yet. So if you can meet with those more progressive members, I think it's advantageous. The bishop, I think it's not a bad idea to connect with the bishop. Just let him know that you're out there and what you're thinking. Because you probably will want to stay on the best side, on the good side of the bishop. Talk with your extension agent. Generally, the extension agents will have more contact with the Amish and the Mennonites. They routinely are asking, our agent is Richard Halupka, and they talk to Richard a lot. Sometimes it's things with garden plants. What kind of pests do I have? What kind of cover crops should I be growing? Questions like that. So make a contact with your extension agent if you have one. And also the Mennonites especially read newsletters like the extension newsletter. I always put an article in the extension newsletter, just like a half a page or a page. They give me, to get what we're doing in our department, things related to our manure storage ordinance. You have to remember, because these people, especially the Amish, they aren't supposed to anyway use radios. They don't have TVs. They have limited access to outside information. So newsletters are a good way to get your word out. You will usually you will need to come to them. If you got a Amish or Mennonite on the other side of the county, and especially if they're steel-wheeled Mennonites or the Amish, it's not very likely they're going to come down to see you. So one thing I would add to is the Amish and Mennonites are a male-dominated culture. You'll want to talk to them if you're trying to teach them something. At least talk to them first. It's okay to talk to the wife, just to ask, is the husband around? But that's about as far as I would go. So you want to go to the man in the household. And go slow. Rome wasn't built in 10 days. You have to just get used to working with them. And when you feel comfortable, maybe get a little more progressive on what you want to do with them. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening. And I will take questions.